All right, this is chapter 20, the Roaring Twenties. So, from business culture to a Great Depression. So, this is the time period right after World War I, 1920, up until 1932. So, President Calvin Coolidge, who was going to take over in 1923 upon the death of Warren Harding, said the business of America is business. And it was a hands-off approach to the presidency that both he and Harding embraced, and it's going to lead to a decade of prosperity. The auto industry is going to boom, and it's going to be sparked by the growth of steel and the rubber industries, oil, the building of roads and construction, tourism across the nation, the expansion of suburbs. All of this is linked together, and it's going to create an economic boom for many Americans. Not all, of course. Farmers, African Americans will suffer throughout the 20s, but this is a time of general prosperity for many people. This is a brand new society, the 1920s, a modern age. Consumer goods are readily available. If people don't have money to buy these items, they can do it with their credit. So they don't need money at the time. They can just agree to pay with installment plans. And now with these new household items, there's more time for leisure. People go on vacations, they go to sporting events, baseball and boxing, and horse racing were huge in this time period. Movies were big. Radios were readily available. There's my dog barking. But there were limits to this prosperity. The wealthiest 5% of Americans had more money than the bottom 60%. And the majority of these families had no savings, and 40% of them lived in poverty. And farmers, you could say the Great Depression started for them in the 1920s. World War I, farming was booming. The world demanded farm products in World War I throughout Europe. But then Europe is going to recover quickly from the war, and farm prices decline, and economic depression is going to ensue. The Republicans dominated the 1920s, and the business lobbyists are going to push their way through the White House. They're going to fight and get lower taxes on personal incomes and corporate taxes. They're going to have high tariffs, and they're very anti-union. Warren Harding's mostly famous for a corrupt government, the Teapot Dome scandal, in which the Interior Secretary Albert Fall received $500,000 by leasing out government oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. Just one example of the corruption of his government. Harding himself had White House parties with alcohol, which alcohol was banned, and he used to sneak women in through a secret entrance of the White House and have affairs. Scandalous guy himself in many ways. He's going to die of a heart attack before his term was up. This political cartoon is commenting on the various scandals of his administration. So Coolidge takes over, and in 1924 he's up for re-election, and he's going to win convincingly. And he'll be president until 1929. Economic diplomacy. The United States is going to make huge loans to European and Latin American governments, and American industry will be established overseas. And anytime their interests were threatened, troops would be sent in to take care of things. This political cartoon, the big business here personified by the flappers. That's these women, although that's not the kind of woman I like. Yikes. Dancing to the big business is dancing and happy and doing the Charleston, and Calvin Coolidge there playing the instrument, just showing you the policies of the president connected to big business. The restriction of freedoms in World War I will lead to the ACLU being formed, the American Civil Liberties Union, and a lot of this will lay the foundation for liberties to be guaranteed in later decades. Charles Schenck was convicted in World War I for distributing anti-draft leaflets, and in the very famous ruling, talking about a clear and present danger. You can't shout fire in a crowded movie theater because that creates a dangerous environment, similar to distributing these anti-war leaflets. So the Supreme Court upheld that conviction back in 1919, but as time went on, we'll see improvements there. This is a time where many people clinging to their old school religious beliefs, not supporting the new theories like Darwin's theory of evolution, which conflicted directly with the words of the Bible in Adam and Eve. So fundamentalists will revolt. These evangelicals felt threatened, but they saw a decline in their traditional values because of all the immigration. There was a rise in Catholicism and Judaism. So there's a lot of issues here. A very famous trial was the Scopes trial. John Scopes was a Tennessee public education teacher, arrested for teaching Darwin's theory of evolution. William Jennings Bryan was actually out on the witness stand going against Scopes, and he was actually embarrassed on trial. Died a few days after it. Not the best way to go out. There is William Jennings Bryan in the court proceedings. This idea of 100% Americanism, this anti-nativist thing that's been happening for decade after decade, really was popular in the 1920s. The KKK saw a resurgence in the 20s, and 3 million members were part of the KKK at that time, and many of them were in the North and out West. Indiana was essentially controlled by the KKK. They even had the governor, who was the Grand Wizard of the KKK, was also the governor of Indiana. They targeted immigrants, especially Jews and Catholics, so it was not just blacks. European immigration will be restricted in the 1920s, limited to 357,000, and that was to ensure that all of those new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe would stop flowing into the country and would not outnumber the old Western immigrants. And Asians, except Filipinos, were barred entry into the country, and the groundwork for Filipino independence was laid, not for their freedom, but to keep them from coming into the country. Here's an image of a KKK gathering in Jackson. And again, showing the limits of immigration here in this political cartoon with Uncle Sam. And one more table showing you the quotas put in place to limit the immigrants. Here is a photograph of Sacco and Vanzetti, who were accused of murder and robbery. Very little evidence was apparent, and they were still found guilty. Became an international event, this trial and their appeals. Max, stop whining. And they were eventually electrocuted in 1927, given the electric chair. There was a growing opposition to this 100% Americanism theme, the idea of cultural pluralism, where society can celebrate the ethnic diversity instead of suppressing it. And a lot of these immigrant groups reinvented themselves, and they claim that they have an equal right to participate in American life as anybody else. In this time period was the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem will emerge as a center for black culture. Many whites would visit these African American dance halls and jazz clubs and speakeasies. But Harlem itself was a place of very much poverty and huge discrimination. But lots of great writing and poetry in this time period, tracing the roots of the black experience. Throughout the 20s, people were urged, if they could, to buy, put into the stock market. Even if you didn't have all the money necessary for stocks, you could just put 10% down and repay the rest. And once you have a profit was the idea, and the stock market continued to rise up throughout the 20s. And by 1929, it was at an all-time high. So heading towards the election of 1928, there was no better potential candidate than Herbert Hoover. He was a mining engineer of tremendous success. He's the one that organized food relief in World War I, literally saving the lives of millions of Europeans by providing food to them. And he was an able Secretary of Commerce under Harding and Coolidge. Wrote a book in which he outlined his beliefs that he didn't think the government should intervene in the economy, which we'll talk about later. So he's going to win the election handily against Al Smith, and the biggest issue was Al Smith was a Catholic, and no Catholic had ever run for president before. People worried he could be a lackey of the Pope. As we can see, Hoover is going to destroy him in this election. 444 to 87. Smith did gain the urban vote and also the rural vote and the votes in the South, which will lay the groundwork for the Democrats in the 1930s, where they will win the next, 5 elections in the 30s and 40s. So the coming of the Depression, October 29th, 1929, known as Black Tuesday, the stock market is going to crash. A panic ensued. In a 5-hour period, $10 billion was lost. There were signs of trouble before 1929. The real estate market collapsed. We can harken back to 2007. We saw a real estate collapse, and then a recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression happened in our times, and that's usually a precursor of bad things to come. That unequal distribution of wealth we talked about throughout the 20s, people are buying all of these products that are available in factories. By the end of the decade, there was just not the same demand for them. Either people that had money weren't buying the products, or most people didn't have the money. So as consumer goods stagnated, unemployment will rise. Market speculation and margin buying will all contribute to the stock market crashing, and it's going to be the worst economic depression in history. First year of the Depression, 26,000 banks failed the first year. And if a bank fails, the people's money was not guaranteed then. The money is lost. Europeans were affected by the Depression. They couldn't pay their loans back to America, causing more problems here. The gross national product was cut down a third. Prices dropped 40%. People couldn't pay their bills. 25% unemployment. But that doesn't include all of the people who were only working part-time and still couldn't make ends meet. People resorted to living in shanty towns, which they appropriately named Hoovervilles after the president they felt was not doing what was necessary to help them out. 1930s were famous for the long bread lines where people desperately looked for anything to get by day. See the stock market rising up throughout the 20s. From 23, it really takes off, peaking in 1929, and then a huge crash, and it took years to recover, which we will talk about in the next chapter. So Hoover's response, it didn't seem enough for the people. Didn't seem like he cared enough. Kept saying the end of the Depression was around the corner. Yeah, if 12 years is around the corner, then he was right. He did not believe the government should directly intervene. So he believed private charities could take care of the people. Local governments can take care of the people in need. He wanted the businesses to work together to keep up investing and employment, and that would be sufficient to end this terrible depression. It was not. Here's a picture of unemployed men lined up in 1930, and the line goes on and on. So Hoover's going to do some things. He's going to create the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which will loan money out to failing banks and railroads and businesses. The home loan bank system to try to help people so they don't lose their houses. He's going to approve $2 billion for projects in local relief. But he didn't do anything further, and he believed it would be doing the people a disservice to give money directly to the unemployed, which is going to be started by his replacement, Franklin Roosevelt, and that's something very common in today's day and age. So here is a Hooverville outside of Seattle, and you can see people evicted from their homes just put together small little shacks, no electricity, no running water, just a roof over their heads, literally. Very famous photograph of an unemployed man in San Francisco, and people selling apples on a city street, 5 cents for an apple, just trying anything to make ends meet. So this horrible depression was upon America and Europe. It's going to lead to a whole slew of problems, which we will get into, and be part of the reason for the Second World War. All right, that concludes Chapter 20.